Ever get that feeling, when you see someone having a tough time, like really struggling, and you're not sure how to help? It's like this helplessness that kind of sits with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, imagine that feeling, but like on a massive scale. Today, we're going deep on something that's exactly that pill. Texas's support system for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Or, maybe more accurately, the lack of it.
Right.
So for this deep dive, we're turning to a September 2024 article. It's from Texas Watchdog. Have you heard of them?
Yeah, they're a nonprofit, right? Focused on investigative journalism.
You got it. And they're known for, holding the powerful accountable, especially when it comes to, how public money is being used. Mm-hmm. Their article, it's titled, Waiting for a Miracle, The Cruelty of Texas's IDD Support System. And it's pretty eye-opening, to say the least.
I've heard some rumblings. It's a tough situation.
It really is. See, here's the thing. Texas loves to be big on everything.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Everything's bigger in Texas, as they say.
Exactly. But when it comes to IDD services, it's a different story. We're talking a wait list, get this, over 113,000 people long.
Wow.
And this is in a state with a booming economy. Like, they've got a $32 billion budget surplus just sitting there. It's kind of baffling, right?
It's a head-scratcher, for sure. How can a state have so much and yet fall so short for its most vulnerable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about basic care here, essential support. What's the roadblock?
Well, you got to look at the political landscape. It plays a huge role. There's deep-rooted resistance to the Affordable Care Act.
The ACA.
Yeah, and specifically the part about expanding Medicaid.
Right. For those of us who, don't have the entire ACA memorized.
Of course. So the ACA, it was signed back in 2010. The goal was to get more people covered by health insurance. And a key piece of that was expanding Medicaid, basically. States got offered federal money to cover more low-income residents under their Medicaid programs.
So more people get health care, including, I assume, many folks with IDD who rely on those programs.
Exactly. That's the idea. But Texas, well, their leadership has been against this expansion from day one.
Why is that?
They see it as, the federal government overstepping its boundaries. They'd rather find Texas solutions, as they call it, for healthcare.
But even with a $32 billion surplus, come on, surely some of that could be used to help out, right?
That's what many advocates argue. By rejecting the expansion, Texas is leaving billions in federal funding just sitting there. Money that could be a lifeline for IDD individuals and their families.
It's a lot of money left on the table.
It is. Think about it. An estimated 1.5 million Texans, many with IDD, are without the coverage they'd be eligible for if the state expanded Medicaid.
Wow. So instead of accepting help, they're clinging to this ideology, all while thousands are stuck on waiting lists.
It's a tough situation, no doubt. And it leads us to what Texas does offer. State-supported living centers, they go by SSLCs.
Right, the SSLCs. I read about those in the article. They've been around for a while, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, decades. But honestly, they haven't exactly kept up with the times, especially when it comes to their approach to care.
The article didn't paint a very rosy picture, that's for sure. Something like 13 facilities, housing around 3,000 people. Sounds, I don't know, a little outdated.
And here's the ticker. They're really expensive to run. We're talking $230,000 per person annually.
Hold on. $230,000 per person every year.
It's a staggering amount, especially when you compare it to community-based care.
Right, because that's the alternative, right?
It is, and it's much more affordable. We're talking roughly $70,000 per person per year.
Okay, so let me get this straight. It's actually cheaper to provide more humane, integrated care than to keep these SSLCs going. What's the logic here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's complicated, and honestly, it goes way beyond just the budget.
So if it's not about saving money, what's keeping these SSLCs going? Why hold on to something that seems, outdated and way too expensive?
Well, you know how it is. Often it comes down to politics, right?
Politics. Figures.
SSCs, yeah. They've got some pretty powerful friends, you could say. Contractors who, benefit from them sticking around. Local economies tied to these facilities. It's a whole system, resistant to change.
It's easy to get caught up in the weeds.
Yeah.
The budget this, the political strategy that. But at the end of the day, this is about real people. Families dealing with the fallout of these decisions every single day.
Absolutely. Can't lose sight of that. That's where you really see the human cost of these systemic issues. It hits hard.
The article, it talks about this woman, Connie Henton. She's got an adult son with autism. And get this, he's been on the wait list for services for, are you ready for this? 16 years.
16
years. I can't even imagine what that family's been through.
It's heartbreaking, and it's not just them, unfortunately. The article, it calls it a caregiver crisis. Might sound dramatic, but honestly, it's not an exaggeration. Thousands of families in Texas, same situation. They end up having to be full-time caregivers because the state just doesn't step up.
So not only are individuals with IDD let down by the system, but then their families, they get pushed into these impossible positions. What kind of impact does that have long term?
It's huge. Think about it. You might have to put your career on hold, drain your savings, all because the state hasn't allocated the resources for your loved one. And that takes a toll. Burnout, financial strain, it's a lot. And then often families have to lean on other family members for support. It's this ripple effect, across generations even.
It's like their whole lives are put on pause. What about siblings of folks with IDD? Don't they often end up shouldering some of that caregiving too?
All the time. It packs everything, really. Their opportunities, their own lives. It gets complicated, emotional, logistically, you name it.
It's like a domino effect of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And then you've got the people who are doing the actual day-to-day work, caring for these individuals.
Yeah.
The direct support professionals, the DSPs.
The unsung heroes, for sure.
Absolutely. So how are these DSPs being supported? By the same state that's relying so heavily on them? I mean, what are they even paid?
You're not going to believe this. $10.60 an hour, on average.
You're kidding, right? $10.60. That's barely livable anywhere, let alone Texas.
It's insulting. These are dedicated people entrusted with the well-being of some of the most vulnerable, managing behaviors, personal care, medications, you name it. And for what? Practically nothing.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you know what really gets me? The article, it mentions this crazy pay gap. SSLC workers, who are essentially doing the same kind of work as DSPs, but in those institutions, they could get paid up to $17.50 an hour.
Yeah.
How does that make any sense?
Right. It says a lot about priorities, don't you think?
Hey.
Like, they're saying that locking people away in these institutions, even though it costs a fortune and, the effectiveness is questionable at best, that's somehow more valuable than community-based care provided by these incredibly dedicated DSPs.
It's backwards. You'd think they'd want to invest in systems that keep people connected in their communities with their families. But instead, it's like they're incentivizing this system that isolates and segregates. It's like they're blind to the human cost of their decisions.
And the worst part, this cycle, the low wages, the high turnover, the staffing shortages, it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like when you don't pay DSPs enough, they're going to burn out. They're going to leave, right? And then who's left to provide that care? It just reinforces this idea that, community-based care doesn't work. We got to rely on those institutions.
It's like they're creating the problem and then pointing to it as a reason to keep doing things the same old way.
Exactly. And it's the individuals with IDD and their families who pay the price.
It's incredibly frustrating, especially, considering Texas has the money to do better. They've got that $32 billion surplus we keep talking about. They could easily afford to build a system that actually works, a system that's compassionate and effective.
No doubt. It's not about a lack of resources, that's for sure.
So what's the deal then? If it's not the money, what's stopping them?
It's a combination of things, really. You've got political ideology, you've got special interest groups who benefit from the status quo, and honestly, there's just a lack of political will. It's not a sexy issue, It's not something that gets politicians elected.
It's disheartening. In a state as wealthy as Texas, a state that prides itself on, independence and taking care of its own, it's just...
Well, it seems like the people who need the most help are the ones being left behind. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about priorities, about who we value as a society.
It does. It's a heavy topic, that's for sure. But that's kind of the point of these deep dives, right? To really dig into these issues. So where do we go from here? It can feel overwhelming, What can any of us actually do about this?
It starts with awareness. Sharing stories like Connie Henson's, the thousands of others just like it. Don't let these stories be ignored. Talk about it. Write to your representatives. Make some noise.
Hold those in power accountable. Let them know this isn't just some abstract policy issue. It's about real lives.
Exactly. And then educate yourself. There are amazing organizations out there fighting for change. Support them. Get involved.
Be an advocate.
Yes. Be a voice for those who aren't always heard.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about Texas, is it? This is bigger than that.
Way bigger. It's about who we are as a society. Who are we lifting up? Who are we choosing to protect? And who are we leaving behind? Those are questions we should all be asking ourselves long after this conversation is over.
That's a powerful thought to end on. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll catch you next time.